Welcome, everybody, to the latest edition of the Bullpen with Adam the Bull. And today, we are talking, yes, football, as we normally do this time of the year. I got some things to say about the Browns and the rest of the AFC. However, we're going to start today's podcast talking baseball. Yes, the silent majority of you out there, and I think it's bigger than we think, that love baseball and are fascinated by this time of the year. As the managerial hirings are happening, the Guardians have a new manager. There was some shocking news with Craig Counsell leaving Milwaukee for the Cubs. And what happened with the Mets there. We'll talk managerial moves. And free agency is now officially underway. Unlike basketball and football, things don't happen right away. But will the Guardians and other teams be involved? Well, we know other teams will be involved. Will the Guardians be involved for Stephen Vogt getting his team better? We'll talk about all of that, plus where I rank every team in the AFC as of right now. That's all coming up on this edition of the Bullpen with Adam the Bull, brought to you by Bet Rivers.
You're watching Adam the Bull on the Bet Rivers Network.
So yesterday was a big day in terms of managers in Major League Baseball. We had breaking news during the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show on Monday that the Guardians had hired themselves a new manager. And no, it was not Craig Counsell, who was my top choice for the Guardians when the offseason began. Counsell did meet with the Guardians, and we'll get to the Counsell side of things in a minute. It wasn't even a candidate I had considered when I did a breakdown about a month ago, maybe even a little longer than that, about who should be the next Guardians manager. The guy that ended up being the manager, Stephen Vogt, wasn't on my list. Now, Stephen Vogt was not on my list because I don't think he's a good candidate. It's just a name I hadn't heard mentioned yet. So I went with some candidates and some coaches that had either been around on coaching staffs for a while, had been a manager previously, or was a former member of the Guardians. I did suggest some guys in the Stephen Vogt group that have more recently been players, but I didn't think of Stephen Vogt. But I definitely should have, and I'll tell you why in just a second. But first, I want to let you know, to get extra value this football season with Bet Rivers Squares. Win up to $10,000 in bonus money. We all could use some extra cash. $10,000 sounds nice to me. Bet $10 in same-game parlays on any game with the Squares icon to earn a square. So how did the Guardians end up hiring Stephen Vogt as their next manager? Well, after doing plenty of research, not only with people that I know, but just hearing some people on MLB radio, on other podcast avenues, as I listened through the gamut and then texted a couple of people I know for some feedback on Stephen Vogt, every answer that came back to me, whether personally or to everybody, was extremely positive. One example is Steve Phillips, the former GM of the New York Mets, who I heard this morning talk about, hey, when he was a GM, he had learned whenever you have a player around and you think he might be a potential coach and GM, you write him on a list, right? And Stephen Vogt was a guy that you wrote on a list. And Stephen Vogt, I heard Mark Canha, who was with the Mets, of course, was with the Brewers last year, just recently got traded to Detroit. He was interviewed yesterday. He played with Stephen Vogt in Oakland, and he said, great guy, not surprised he wanted to be a manager, was always a leader, great teammate, and most importantly, a great person. And as you hear people say this, I heard this time and time again. Let me give you a quote from Mike Ferrin. Mike Ferrin is one of the most, for those who don't know, he does a show on MLB radio. One of the most knowledgeable baseball guys I've ever met in my life. Great guy. And I had texted him about Stephen Vogt actually a month ago when I heard that, not a month ago because Stephen Vogt wasn't mentioned a month ago, but about 2 weeks ago. I was curious because I know Mike interacts with a lot of players and former players. So I asked Mike what his opinion was on Stephen Vogt, and he said, I'm a huge fan, huge in all caps, incomparably good human, bright, data savvy with an old school edge. There'll be some bumps in the road learning on the job, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a better human being to get that job. And indeed he did. Stephen Vogt just celebrated his 39th birthday this week. He is very young. It's very much a departure in terms of age and experience from what the Guardians had. The Guardians, believe it or not, had the highest paid manager in baseball in Terry Francona. And now my guess is they're going to one of the lower paid managers in Stephen Vogt. They had one of the oldest managers in Terry Francona, now going to one of the youngest managers in Stephen Vogt. But what Terry Francona did well, I believe Stephen Vogt will do well also. And that's relate and connect with players. Terry Francona obviously was a player, an older player, big age gap between him and the current players, but a player nonetheless and a player's manager. Stephen Vogt just retired. In fact, he just retired at the end of the 2022 season. Last year, he was a bullpen coach and the quality control coach for the Seattle Mariners. And what's interesting about that is, as a bullpen coach, as a quality control coach, you're dealing with the analytics. Analytics is a word that some people are scared of. I've talked about this before. It freaks people out. You say stats, nobody gets freaked out. You say analytics, you're a nerd. You what? Don't bring that nerdy stuff into my sport. They're just better stats. We got to stop using the word analytics. People will be less scared of it. They're just more accurate statistics. It's that simple. And because Stephen Vogt has played in the analytics era and coached last year for 1 year in the analytics era, it's an advantage. And I love the fact that they've hired this guy that everybody seems to love, that anybody that played with him or managed him or coached him has said, yeah, this guy was born to be a manager. He's going to connect with the players. He was a catcher, and we know that catchers generally make good managers. He wasn't a superstar player, but he did make a couple of all-star teams with Oakland in 2015 and 2016. Those were his two best years. But, good defensive catcher. He didn't make his major league debut till the age of 27 in 2012. Usually you make your major league debut at 27. You're not in the league very long, but he was. He played for 11 seasons in the big league. Well, 10, because he actually missed the entire 2018 season. So he played 10 seasons. He spent the most time with the Oakland Athletics, 6 years in Oakland, 2 in Arizona, and then parts or a full year between Tampa, the Giants, Atlanta, and Milwaukee. So he's been around the league. He knows a lot of players. I think the tricky thing sometimes when you just retired and now you're a manager is if you're with the same team, that can be a weird transition. That's what happened with the Cubs and David Ross. We'll get to that in a minute. But, when he first became manager, well, a lot of the guys there were guys he was teammates with. That won't be the case with Stephen Vogt. Or there may turn out to be a couple of guys he was teammates with along the line. But, he didn't play with these guys in Cleveland, was my point. He wasn't on this team with these guys. And this Guardians team is a very young team. It's a very young team. And so they're a team that 2 years ago made the playoffs. Last year, it was a really bad season for the Guardians, one of the worst year of Terry Francona's decade in Cleveland. And they've got some building blocks. Obviously, the Guardians have a very good pitching staff. Will the team spend any money? Will ownership spend any money to improve the lineup? I would hope so. They need 3 new additions in the lineup, at least 2 new guys from out of the organization via trade or free agency. I think they need to get a left fielder and a right fielder, maybe even a middle infielder, or they got probably going to give Arias or Rocchio or whoever an opportunity in the middle infield. But I think Stephen Vogt comes to the Guardians at a good time. I do think, despite my recent complaints about the franchise, I think generally it's a good-run franchise. The owner stays out of the way. They're patient. They're not going to fire guys right away. You have a great front office here. Great front office has taken a little hit in the last year. They need to bounce back. They haven't done their best work of late. But overall, it's a very good front office that's had a lot more wins over their time here than losses by a lot. So I like a young manager. I think the Guardians needed to go with a fresh voice, a young voice, someone that wasn't here to shake things up. Now, I would like to see, I'll be curious to see who the Guardians end up keeping on their current coaching staff, if anybody. DeMarlo Hale, if he's interested, probably would be, a nice veteran bench coach to have for a young manager. But, you bring in a new manager, I think even if it's a young guy, you want to give him a chance to bring in some of his own guys. So hopefully Stephen Vogt will at least have some say on who's in the coaching staff. When you hire a manager, you never know if it's going to work. Even if it's a guy who's proven, right? You never know for sure. Yeah, there's the handful of managers, the Bruce Bochy's of the world who went to Texas and won them a World Series, Terry Francona, Dusty Baker, Joe Madden. These are guys, and Madden's probably trying to get back in the game too. But there's a handful of managers that, you feel confident when you hire them. I think Craig Counsell's one of those guys. We'll see. But when you hire a manager that's never had a job before or has limited experience, you never know how it's going to turn out. The Mets, who everybody thought was going to get Craig Counsell, end up with a guy in Carlos Mendoza. I think it's funny that all these Met fans I know, now they're all ripping Counsell. Don't be jealous because he'd rather be a Cubs manager than a Mets manager. It's that simple. We could talk about the money all you want. The Cubs paid Craig Counsell a ton of money. But he went to the Cubs over the Mets. It wasn't just about the money. There was more to it than that. And Met fans are bitter. They've added Carlos Mendoza. And a lot of fans are like, who, this guy? He's terrible, blah, blah, blah. Well, you don't know that. Just like with the Guardians, I don't know that Stephen Vogt's going to be a great manager. He seems like a good choice. But if a guy's never been a manager, how would you possibly know? Stephen Vogt or Carlos Mendoza could both be the next great manager or the next terrible manager, or most likely somewhere in the middle, which is where most managers and coaches in all sports are. And it depends on your talent. So good luck to the Mets with Carlos Mendoza. Monzo was telling me before the show that he's a quiet guy, doesn't like to talk much. That should work out perfectly fine in New York. That's a great situation for that. In all seriousness, no, he may do a good job. But the final point on Stephen Vogt is he seems like the right type of first-year manager. Now it's got to pay out. But let me throw this little tidbit. If you want to throw an interesting, because I think the bench coach is important as an advisor for a young manager. I'm going to throw a crazy one at you. I think this is probably unlikely at this point in his career. But if for some reason if Joe Madden wants to get back in the game and nobody wants to hire him as a manager, unlikely. I think if he wants to get back in, one of these teams, the Astros still need a manager, the Angels, the Brewers, the Padres. He's not going to go to the Angels because he already went there, and it didn't go great. But let's say none of those teams are interested, and Joe Madden wants to get back in. It wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world for Joe Madden to end up as the bench coach in Cleveland, which would be quite ironic since he was the opposing manager when the Cubs beat the Guardians, at the time the Indians, in the World Series. Stephen Vogt originally came to the majors after he was drafted by Tampa in 2007. And I mentioned he made his major league debut in 2012 for the Rays. The manager for the 2012 Rays, Joe Madden. Now, he wasn't in the big leagues with Joe Madden very long, only 18 games. By the way, in his first season in the majors, Stephen Vogt with the Rays in 2012 was 0 for 25 with 2 walks. There you go. Up in the big leagues for 18 games, didn't get 1 hit. And then he went to Oakland after that. So he wasn't with Joe Madden very long, but he was with him, and he was in the organization for a while. So just something that, I think it's unlikely, but if Joe wants to get back in the game and none of those other teams want to hire him, I don't know that he would be a bench coach anymore, but he'd probably be an interesting choice. Something to keep an eye on there. As for the Craig Counsell situation, before I switch gears to football, just a shocking. When I saw that news, I was stunned. I was not expecting David Ross to get fired. I don't think he would have been fired had Counsell said no or had Counsell not become available. As I've said to many people, and many people have said to me, yes, I think the Cubs did David Ross dirty, but it's a business. Craig Counsell's a better manager. The Brewers had gone to the playoffs, I believe, 4 times in their first 45 years of existence. And with Craig Counsell, they went to the playoffs, I think, 5 out of 8 years, including 5 of the last 6. And I think they had a losing record twice in 8 years. His first year and the COVID year, I think, were the only years he had a losing record. He's an excellent manager. He hasn't had a lot of great success in the playoffs, so you can nitpick where you want. But he's a very good manager, gets the best out of his players, and had a franchise that had done nothing forever consistently in the mix. What can you with half the payroll? Well, maybe not half the payroll that the Cubs will have, but at best 2/3 the payroll. At best, that would signal to me the fact that the Cubs made that big move. It's very reminiscent of when they fired Ricky Renteria after 1 year and hired Joe Madden. Renteria really didn't do anything he deserved to get fired, but it was the smart move, and I think it's the same thing here. If I'm David Ross, though, I'm pretty bitter at the moment. This has been my organization to end my career. I helped end the playoff drought, and to get done like this is pretty cringeworthy. All right, I'm going to wrap it up with some football. Do the picks later in the week. The Browns, as of now, looking at the Bet River Sportsbook, are a 6-point underdog in Baltimore this Sunday. Game is 1 o'clock. Browns trying to get to 6-3. That will not be easy. They obviously got spanked by the Ravens at home. That was a game DTR played. Deshaun Watson, we would expect him to play this week. Browns defense did not play well in their first game against the Ravens, but it was a weird game. Hopefully they bounce back this week. Now, thinking about the AFC. If the season ended today, we're at the halfway point. Some teams have played 9 games. Some teams have played 8. As of right now, all 4 teams in the AFC North would be in the playoffs. The Ravens would be division champs. They'd be the 2 seed. And then the other 3 teams, Steelers, Browns, and Bengals, would be the 5, 6, and 7 seeds, all at 5 and 3. 4 of the 12 teams that are 2 games or more over 500 are from the AFC North. And this one final stat, I may have mentioned this on Sunday, although probably not because the Bengals hadn't played yet Sunday night. But so in the AFC North is, I've got to get the exact numbers. I have it saved here. The AFC North, I believe, is 17-6 in games outside their division. 17-6. So when the Bengals, the Browns, the Ravens, the Steelers play teams outside of the AFC North, they've won 17, lost 6, which is a 740 winning percentage. The next best is the NFC East at 14-11. That's a 560 winning percentage. No other division is more than a game over 500 outside of their division. That's how much better the AFC North is than the rest of the league. So I started thinking about not just the AFC North, but the AFC. And right now, how do I rank the best teams in the AFC? Because there's a lot of good teams. There are 11 teams in the AFC 500 or better. There are 13 teams within a game of 500. And in my mind, the only terrible team in the AFC is New England. That's the only terrible team. There's a lot of terrible teams in the NFC. A lot may be strong. But there's 4 or 5 teams in the NFC that are really bad. AFC, not so much. Even the Titans at 3-5 and Broncos 3-5, I don't think are terrible. They're not very good, but they're not terrible. And I think the Titans are going to be interesting with Will Levis. I like what I've seen from him for 2 weeks. And obviously the Raiders showed a lot of heart and excitement playing for former New York Giant Antonio Pierce. I love what Antonio Pierce had to say about he had all the practice squad players on the bench for the game saying, hey, they're part of the team. They should be here too. That's going to win you some points there. That's a great job out of Antonio Pierce. All right. The AFC. We have right now, if the playoffs started today, the Chiefs would be the 1 seed, then the Ravens, Jags, Dolphins, Steelers, Browns, Bengals. But are they in that order? The Bills would not be a playoff team. The Chargers would not be a playoff team. Who are the best teams in the AFC right now? To me, it's a no-brainer. The best team in the AFC is not the number 1 seed Kansas City Chiefs. It's the number 2 seed Baltimore Ravens. Nobody's playing better in football, I don't think, even the Eagles. And certainly, right now, I'm just talking AFC. The Ravens have been the most impressive team. I was not all in believing in the Ravens, but the last 3 weeks, they've crushed the Lions and crushed the Seahawks. Now, I don't think the Lions or Seahawks are great teams. I think the Lions are very good. I think the Seahawks are, a solid team. But they destroyed both of those teams. Destroyed. They were never in the game. That really took Baltimore for a new level. Now, Lamar Jackson's got a lot to prove in the playoffs, but I got to give him credit. He's having his best season since his MVP season. I really like how he's played, and their defense is excellent. Right there with the Browns is the best in football. So I got the Ravens as the 1 seed right now, or the number 1 team, if I was just doing a power rankings of the AFC. So who's number 2? I can make a case for a few teams, but in the end, I'll go with the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I don't love how they've played. But I think my standard for them is so high that even if it's below where I expected, it's still better than most teams. Their offense has not been on all cylinders all year. Defense is really good, though. So I got the Chiefs at 2. The third best team in the AFC, maybe you call me biased, we'll see. I think right now it's close. And again, I can make an argument for probably 3-4 teams, but I'm going with Cincinnati. I think the Bengals are the third best team in the AFC right now. They appear to be, in the last 2 weeks, they have dominated both San Francisco and Buffalo. Joe Burrow is completely healthy and playing like the MVP candidate that he is. Their defense is playing at a really high level. Their offensive line is playing its best football since they've had Joe Burrow. I think they're 3. 4, I'm going with the Jaguars. They've won 5 in a row. And I'm a big believer in Trevor Lawrence. Big. I know a lot of people think he's overrated. I am not one of those people. I think they're a good balanced team. And you look at their strength of victory, means what's the winning percentage of the teams you've beaten? It's 509. That's a really good strength of victory there. Number 5, I'm going. It's again a tough call. I'm going with the Dolphins at 5. Their strength of victory is the worst of any of the AFC contenders. In fact, the Dolphins' strength of victory might be the worst in all of football. It is. They're 6-3, but their wins are against. They beat the Chargers, solid team, 500. Their other wins: Patriots, Broncos, Giants, Panthers, Patriots. All absolutely awful teams. So they've beaten 1 decent team, 5 terrible teams. So I have them 5, right? I got Ravens 1, Chiefs 2, Bengals 3, Jags 4, Dolphins 5. I've got the Browns at 6. Their defense is playing great. Watson looked serviceable last week. If he continues to improve, if Deshaun Watson could play at a high level, they're going to move up the charts. I do like what I saw, especially in the second half. I talked a lot about that on the Sunday podcast. We'll do more looking ahead to the Browns-Ravens matchup on Thursday, but I got the Browns in the 6th spot. I'll put Buffalo at 7, even though they have not played well lately. Houston 8, Chargers 9, Steelers 10, Jets 11, Colts 12, Titans 13, Raiders 14, Broncos 15, Patriots 16. That's my rankings in the AFC as of right now. Maybe update that every week. All right, that's it for me today. Thanks to Brian Monzo for producing as always. Thanks to all of you for watching and listening. I'll talk to you next time. Where else but right here in the Bullpen with Adam the Bull. Brought to you by Bet Rivers. See you, everybody.